Hi everyone. So for 5:30, we're going to be talking with Mason Hickman. He's the digital coordinator of Planned Parenthood of Ohio. I'm just going to make him the co-host now. We're going to be talking about HIV criminalization as well as the services Planned Parenthood provides related to HIV and other STIs.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. Would you just like to introduce yourself for people who don't know about you or your work?
Yeah, so yes, my name is Mason. I use he or they pronouns. I am the digital organizer with Planned Parenthood Advocates of Ohio, but some folks may also know me from having worked with Equality Ohio, so I'm kind of all over the place. But yes, I am going to be talking just a little bit about the services that Planned Parenthood provides, as well as kind of what the landscape looks like if you are someone living with HIV in Ohio. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. Bear with me in this Zoom age that we're living in. All right. Okay, let me minimize my face. Awesome. So yeah, I will say off the bat, I am no expert on these issues, but I will share with you what I know and my personal lived experience, and hopefully I will be able to answer any questions that folks have. So to start off, I kind of want to introduce the idea of legal and lived equality. So legal and lived equality means being able to come out in your hometown. It means being able to be who you are and love who you are. It means finding a local doctor or a service provider who's going to treat you with dignity and respect. And it means to going to a school where you can use the restroom that corresponds with your gender.
And I've heard this before. She says, I really felt.
And then basically what this is saying is that, you know, you deserve to live free from discrimination under the law, but it also means being able to navigate the world free from discrimination just like anybody else. So it's legal equality, but it's also lived equality. And obviously that is what we all want and what we strive for. And that's kind of why we're here today. So quick question, and folks can answer unmuted, they can answer in the chat. But if you needed an HIV test today, would folks know where to go? And that can be a yes or a no. Yes, awesome, yes. Equitas is an amazing resource, yes. Awesome, good. Yeah, there are so many places that people can go. Just a few to list in Columbus. Yes, Equitas Health, the Wilth Student Medical Center on campus, Ohio Health, and you can actually get an HIV test at Planned Parenthood. There is one on East 17th Avenue, right by the McDonald's on OSU's campus. So there are probably people who don't know that Planned Parenthood does do STD and HIV testing and treatment. And that's fair because, you know, generally HIV is not the first thing that people think of when they hear Planned Parenthood. But Planned Parenthood of Greater Ohio, we offer a super wide range of services, and that goes, you know, from birth control, STD testing and treatment, abortion, which can be medical or surgical, gynecological exams, gender affirming care, which is new, HIV testing and counseling, adoption services, colonoscopy, cervical cancer diagnosis and treatment, you name it, we're there. So yeah, specifically, you know, with our HIV services, we can do low to no cost tests. Like I said, we have a ton of different health centers around the state. And the closest one to Ohio State's campus is literally in walking distance. You can make an appointment today. You can actually make an appointment online. You don't even have to talk to anybody if you need a test. It's easy and it's painless. And if you do test positive, we are able to connect you with resources for treatment and counseling without shame or judgment. Okay, so another question for you. Should it be a 5th-degree felony to stand on the sidewalk if you have herpes? No, obviously not, right? And it's not a felony to stand on the sidewalk if you have herpes. But if you are an Ohioan who is living with HIV, things are actually a little bit different. So what I'm going to cover now is Ohio's HIV laws as they currently stand. And a lot of this research is from the Ohio Health Modernization movement. They do a ton of great work around trying to modernize these laws because, as we're about to cover, they are incredibly discriminatory and completely out of date. So let's start, with just basic sexual encounters. If you are someone living with HIV, it is a second-degree felony to have anal, vaginal, oral sex, or sex with the use of a toy without disclosure. So think about that for a second, right? It would be really easy for you to verbally disclose your status to someone, but at a later date, that person could say that you never told them. And without proof of that verbal exchange, you could be hit with a second-degree felony. That is the Ohio law as it currently stands. And on top of that, if you are convicted for failing to disclose before sexual conduct, you actually have to register as a sex offender. And that is the law. When it comes to spitting and biting, it is also a second-degree felony, because if you are someone living with HIV, your saliva can be considered a deadly weapon under Ohio law. So that's problematic for a lot of reasons, obviously. But, at the end of the day, it's just completely stigmatizing, and it really dehumanizes people who are living with HIV when you think about it, because there aren't felony charges for anybody else who, might spit on someone or get their saliva somewhere, right? Like this is specifically for people living with HIV. They went out of their way to put these laws in place. So continuing on that note, bodily substances, it is a third-degree felony for exposing another person to your bodily fluids. That could be urine, feces, semen, blood, or any other fluid. And it is also a fourth-degree felony for people living with HIV to attempt to donate blood or plasma if you are aware of your status. So as we know, specifically blood donation, for a very long time has been kind of discriminatory towards LGBTQ people, and it still is, frankly. Sexually active, gay, male identified folks are not able to donate blood if they've been sexually active in the last year. That's relatively new. For a long time, it was if you had ever been a male identified person having sex with another male identified person, you couldn't donate blood. So all around, there's a pattern here, right? Essentially, it's just discriminatory, it's just stigmatizing, and we know all blood is tested, all of it. And there's no reason for this type of outdated legislation. Ultimately, these laws, like many Ohio laws, are not based in science, and they don't promote public health, but instead they perpetuate super harmful stigma against people living with HIV, but they also perpetuate homophobia. So continuing on that, right? You're like, I wish this was the end. No, there's more. When it comes to sex work specifically, and this comes back to the question of being criminalized for standing on a sidewalk, right? It is a third-degree felony if you are a person living with HIV to engage in sex work. And it is a fifth-degree felony for signaling, stopping, or attempting to stop someone with the intention of selling sex. Wow, that's vague, right? That is really, really vague. So, what do those activities include? What's the definition that they're looking for? So sex work, any sexual activity for hire, even if there is no risk of HIV transmission. And solicitation or loitering, honestly, is just existing, right? Signaling, stopping, attempting to have a conversation with someone, trying to stop the driver of a car, approaching a driver in a stopped car, like what? So, sexual activity doesn't even have to occur for you to be charged with these things, charged and convicted, right? If you're living with HIV, you could be convicted of a felony. Well, you will be convicted of a felony instead of a misdemeanor for any of this, right? Generally on its own, sex work is more of a misdemeanor crime, but well, it shouldn't be a crime at all. But if you are someone living with HIV, it's immediately a felony. That is immediately enhanced just because of your status. And on top of that, when it comes down to solicitation or loitering, we all know that all it takes is a cop to accuse you of something, and that's it. So you could just be standing on the sidewalk, chewing some gum, existing as a person living with HIV. And if your actions or body language or what have you is perceived a certain way, this is what you could be under Ohio law. So it is that outdated and that discriminatory. And then just reiterating the fact that on its own, it would be a misdemeanor, but solely because of someone's HIV status alone, they will be convicted of felonies for crimes that are generally misdemeanor, right? Also, sex work is real work, and what we really need is legislation to also protect sex workers. So all of that said, right, that is a lot of legislation that people don't generally talk about. When we're talking about, whether it's LGBTQ issues or sex education or what have you, these laws don't generally come up. I was 22 years old when I found out that this was Ohio law. And obviously we have to do something to change it. So, what do we do, right? I think that's the question that we always ask ourselves when we're talking about policy that is problematic or discriminatory, right? There has to be something we can do. So some of the proposed changes to Ohio's laws come directly from the Ohio Health Modernization movement. So just a couple of things that they suggest to modernize Ohio's HIV laws. Starting off the bat, if you want to charge someone with a felony, you should need to prove that that person intentionally transmitted HIV or AIDS to another person and be able to prove that. Not even a felony, misdemeanor is what they are pushing for, right? Allow risk reduction measures to serve as a defense to prosecution. So if you used condoms, a different type of barrier, dental dams, you are on medication such as PrEP, that should be able to be your defense if you are in fact, accused of something, right? Because we know that these barriers, this medication, it works. We're living in the 21st century with modern medicine, and we should act like it. Our lawmakers should act like it, right? Eliminating all HIV-specific felonies and penalties and make intentional transmission a misdemeanor level offense. So as I said before, the enhancement of penalties is solely based on someone's HIV status. Nothing else, nothing. And that really should not be the case in the year 2021. Something else that they suggest is only allowing for legal punishment. I don't like the word punishment, but only allow for punishment if actual transmission occurs. You prove that transmission has occurred, right? A few more, and these are honestly just the bare bones, right? We're not going to get to where we want to be tomorrow, but there are small steps that we can take to be in a better place. So a few more. Remove the discriminatory enhancements for those who are thought to have been participating in sex work. Remove the felony enhancement under the bodily fluid statute for people living with HIV. Remove the penalties for blood or organ donation for folks living with HIV. And remove the requirement for people prosecuted under Ohio law to have to register as sex offenders. because that is absurd. That doesn't make any sense. Again, not based in science, not based in fact. So those are just a couple of things that folks on the ground and at the Ohio Health Modernization movement are pushing for. And so hopefully that is something that we can see happen in Ohio over the next couple of years. And you know, there might be folks in the room who are like, well, why can't we do something tomorrow to change this? So I'm going to talk just a little bit about how possible this specific change could be right now in Ohio. So I am not a healthcare professional. I am more of a policy wonk. So please bear with me for 5 to 10 minutes while I talk about the mess that is the Ohio legislature and how that directly ties to the lives of people with HIV in Ohio, right? There's a direct line. So right off the bat, Ohio is incredibly gerrymandered. And you can kind of look at the screen here. The red is the amount of Republicans that we have. The blue are Democrats. But what is gerrymandering, right? So gerrymandering is essentially when those in power manipulate the lines of a district or a constituency to favor one party or group. So when Ohio had new districts drawn in 2011, this is essentially what happened. With gerrymandering, Ohio Republicans were able to secure power and make it really, really difficult to get them out of office. So here's an example. From 2012 to 2020, Republicans received 55% of congressional votes, but had 75% of the seats, whereas Democrats had 45% of the vote and 25% of the seats. Now, I'm not good at math, but frankly, that doesn't add up. There's obviously an issue there. So because of this, it is way harder to get them out of office. And they know that. So because of that, they don't worry about how extreme their policies or positions are, right? What's an extreme policy or position? These HIV criminalization laws. And we know that these laws don't represent the majority opinion of Ohioans. And it's not just HIV criminalization, right? This is an intersectional issue that comes back down to lack of sex education or abstinence only education or funding for schools, abortion bans, etc. You name it. But good news, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, right? Ohio just had its census, which is great. And we are redrawing our districts this year. And new laws have been put in place to try and lessen the ability to gerrymander, essentially. So if we are able to get fair districts, we will then be able to elect people who actually represent us. And then those people in power can get rid of, you know, the HIV criminalization laws and put in modern policy that is based in science. So even though you wouldn't think that all of this is tied back directly to the Ohio General Assembly, it absolutely is. And that said, given the makeup of, you know, the Ohio legislature as it now stands, there is a very strong hostility towards LGBTQ people in Ohio. And we know that HIV can impact all people, not just LGBTQ people, but we also know that conservative lawmakers view those living with HIV and those who are LGBTQ with stigma and shame, right? They lump everybody together and, you know, they are very ignorant. So just a couple of things that we have seen here in Ohio that can tie back to the HIV criminalization that we've seen. So we have the Ohio Fairness Act, right? If passed, it would extend civil rights and protections to LGBTQ people in the workplace, housing, education, all the parts of your daily life, right? It would essentially give LGBTQ people basic human rights. It has been reintroduced for the 10th time. So that's a decade, right? And it has yet to be passed. Additionally, the trans athlete ban has been introduced in both the Ohio House and Senate. So if that were to become law, it would ban transgender youth from participating in school sports from K to 12. And additionally, last year, Ohio lawmakers introduced legislation that would ban trans youth from receiving gender affirming care. So if you've seen it, that legislation in Arkansas that passed, same thing, it's the same thing. So that is kind of where Ohio is at when it comes to how we have treated LGBTQ people and anybody in that circle, right? So when we talk about trying to change these laws, we have to get these people out of power first. And how do we do that? With fair districts and electing people who actually represent us. So that said, right, what can you do today in terms of all of this? So know your rights. If you are someone who is living with HIV, make sure that if you need it, you have documentation that you disclosed your status prior to sexual conduct. Make sure you have what you need in place to keep yourself safe despite these discriminatory and super stigmatized, medically unnecessary BS laws. Know your resources. So if you need a test tomorrow, where do you go? If you need PrEP or PEP, where do you go? Make sure you have access to the healthcare that you need and deserve. Like I said, Planned Parenthood, you can get an HIV test there any day of the week, and you can get all of your other reproductive healthcare needs met. It is a super safe place for LGBTQ folks to go and get that healthcare. I would advocate for that. I love Planned Parenthood. I'm not biased. And we are also offering gender affirming care now. So we really are expanding on the services that we are trying to provide to people. And additionally, just know your lawmakers. So everything that impacts us comes down to the people in power who are making the big decisions. We absolutely need people in office who are committed to representing everything that we deserve. And elections, whether we like it or not, fully impact our lives. And so we have to keep fighting for better. So that said, there is a bright side to all of this. There is a path forward. And yeah, any questions? I'm gonna stop sharing my screen.
Mason, that was wonderful, and it's also great to see you.
You too.
It's with COVID, it's been a while. So one of the questions I have is, do you think these laws that are in place that criminalize HIV are similar to other reproductive laws that try and control the reproductive ability and health of different folks, or do you think this is like, I don't know, like, do you think it's just an extension of control over reproduction?
Yeah, I think that the criminalization of HIV can definitely tie back to the restrictions against abortion access that we've seen, the trans athlete ban. At the end of the day, all of these things are so connected, because we have thoroughly watched over the last year Ohio Republicans not care about science. They don't care about science. They, passed a bill to override any health orders. They don't want to wear masks. They're reopening before it's ready. They don't believe in vaccines. All of these different things, right? And so what we're seeing is, whether it's HIV criminalization, whether it's an abortion ban, a trans athlete ban, you name it, it's not based in science. But what it is based in is fear, right? So when we're talking about abortion access, it's like, oh, we need these bans because abortion is so yada yada, and all this fear mongering. Same thing with the trans athlete ban, right? Like, well, and I'm not going to say the same rhetoric because it's ignorant, but making people scared of trans folks, essentially. Same thing with HIV. A lot of people connect HIV back to LGBTQ people in the 80s, right? AIDS was called the gay cancer. Like, that's what a lot of people connect it back to. And it's just fear of LGBTQ people or folks living with HIV. So I really do think it is all connected. And ultimately, they want to control the things that they refuse to understand and the things that, frankly, they just don't like.
Yeah, well said, Mason. Oh man, I was also just interested in asking, like, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but like, kind of how did these like laws come about, and like when did they come about? Um,
Yeah. I'm not sure the full timeline of how exactly they came about, but I do know that some of them aren't that old, right? One of the ones that I saw was only a couple of years ago, which is very strange when you think about it, because, you know, again, it's not something that Ohio Republicans are like, they're not out here trying to use the science to figure out what legislation to pass. It's more so like, what can benefit them politically in the moment. And, you know, when you think about it, abortion specifically is a really good example of, you know, changing their positions to whatever will get them votes, because Republicans were the pro-choice party in the 1970s and 80s. Actually, they were fine with it. They did not care until the Catholic Church had an issue with it, and then they were going to lose votes, and therefore here we are now. I don't think HIV criminalization is that far off. I think that, you know, they see it as something that will win them votes. And we see that now with the trans athlete ban, right? They need a new something to reel in voters. And so, yeah, it's strange. It really is strange, the things that they decide to focus on when we have one of the highest maternal death rates in the country, highest Black maternal death rates in the country. And so, you know, it's like, where is your science at? Where are you getting that from?
yeah, I like briefly just like looked it up, and like apparently like one law was passed in like 1988, and then like three were passed in 1996, which is when like you saw like treat like treatment becoming more available in the US, which is kind of like
Yeah,
critical to me. Like, and obviously like we didn't understand like the full like U equals U back like in 1996, but there was still treatment. It's just
right. Exactly. Yeah, that's the thing that I think a lot of these lawmakers refuse to understand, right? If they read a book, they probably understand. But HIV is not a death sentence. It's not. And to criminalize and dehumanize people with these barbaric and out of date laws is just not the thing, right? It's just something that we need to correct and move past and get laws that are based in science and that bring, you know, legal and lived equality for all people.
Absolutely. I just keep thinking, what if there was a Republican lawmaker that went to 1 hour of our 10-hour long AIDS Quilt event today? I feel like they would learn so much, and that might, you know, change their mind on the laws that they support. Um, but I don't see them, you know, sitting down with us anytime soon.
Yeah.
But maybe we're always open to chat.
Right. Changing hearts and minds. I mean, you know, one of the things that I've seen in this work is one of the only things that has gotten some lawmakers to change their extremist positions is by knowing somebody that is directly impacted, not a constituent perhaps, but like a family member, somebody actually close to them who they cannot dehumanize. And I'm not saying that, you know, that change is possible for all lawmakers. It most definitely is not. But the minor progress that we have been able to make in the Ohio State House has come from those direct relationships. So I think that what you guys are doing is so incredibly important, because, you know, if people aren't having these conversations, then who is?
yeah, no, that was exactly what like Dr. Teresa Long, who was speaking earlier, said, which is it's really cool that you guys are all kind of saying the same things about like the importance of personal connection.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that will get us where we need to be, if not voting these people out of office and replacing them with better people. So,
Yeah.
Any other?
but thank you guys so much for having me.
Well, I wanted to touch on something if I could. How's everybody?
Sure.
Great job. Thank you. You made a very good point, and there's an evolution and a movement. because of the laws are changing and we're stepping up, you equals you, it is because of those connections of people living longer with HIV. And your parents, you say, I'm working around HIV. They're like, oh, I remember so-and-so died, or this, that was happening at the time. There is a historical perspective now that has been created over the years.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we have a
Yeah.
couple questions over here as well.
Sure.
We wanted to talk about how Planned Parenthood is funded. So we have a new administration. They're talking about changing things with Title X. Are we excited? Are we hopeful about this?
Oh, extremely, yes. When it comes down to Planned Parenthood specifically and our funding, so we did repeal the global gag rule, so funding overseas is back in place, which we love. And yes, the Biden administration announced, I think it was a week or 2 weeks ago, time's not real, that they are working right now to put in new regulations for Title X, and those regulations will allow for Planned Parenthood and any other abortion providers across the country to get back into the Title X program, which allowed us to provide free to very low cost reproductive services to people who could not afford it otherwise. So we're back, which is great.
Which speaks to the importance of voting. I mean, we see places like Georgia have these amazing, people who united the community and got people out to vote. Like they are the reason that we are going to get this funding back, right? Like we owe it to them.
Yeah.
It's upsetting seeing Ohio become more red during this election season, but I'm hoping that, especially for young folks, that this kind of sets a fire under our ass and makes people get a little more legitimate about, I do need to register to vote, and I need to vote, and I need to have backup plans if the day of doesn't work out. Especially during COVID, we have to extend those voting rights so that everyone can vote if they want to.
I mean,
yeah,
I think some of that also has to do with like the extreme gerrymandering. I know like my address is like part of a district that like went Republican, and I'm like, wait, how did that happen? And I'm like, oh, I looked at a map, and I'm like, okay, so this sliver of Columbus was just like taken up.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're getting new maps here in the next couple of months, and we are going to have a very loud presence around these creation of districts. So you will see us out here doing that, and as always, I will share those opportunities with all of you. But yeah, we are gonna fight like hell. So
I know one final question I have was like, how, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but like, how does Ohio kind of compare to other states with HIV like prevalence and HIV criminalization?
that's actually a really good question. I have unfortunately never lived anywhere but Ohio, so I can't speak too much to that, but I will say, in terms of the grand scheme of just how LGBTQ people are treated, not good, right? We are low on that list. And while there are some municipalities across Ohio that do have, protections in place, and there are a lot of cities doing the work to make legal and lived equality better for people living with HIV, ultimately, we just need to do a full overhaul of Ohio to get us back on the map, essentially, and pass progressive policy. But yeah, I would say it's not great. Ohio is definitely slipping. So
I have a question too, and I don't have a super big law background, so I was wondering like what the difference in felonies means. Like, is it, if it's a higher degree, does that mean it's like worse? Like, how does that whole thing work?
yeah. So when it comes to the degree of a misdemeanor or a felony, the higher it is, the I guess stronger is not the right word, the worse your punishment will be, whether that is like the maximum jail or prison time, the maximum fines. So the higher it is, the absolute worst, right? So when we're talking a second-degree felony, that ruins someone's life in Ohio. Just existing as someone with HIV, trying to live like a normal person, if you end up in an unfortunate situation where the law is against you, you don't have a lot to work with. And you know, how we treat felons in this society is a whole nother conversation, right? But it ultimately just comes down to not dehumanizing people. You know, no one deserves to have their life ruined just because they are existing as a person, you know? So, yeah.
Thank you. That's so interesting. We just have so much work that still needs to be done. I know for some folks, they, you know, we say like maybe they thought that the activism ended once gay marriage was legalized in America, and I just get so impassioned, we'll say, when I'm like, you know, there's so much more to do. And again, while HIV isn't an only LGBT issue, it disproportionately affects people who are LGBT. So especially for younger folks who might not know a whole lot about HIV, might not consider it as much of a threat as it was in the past. I think things like this that just show how, you know, outdated our laws are, and you know, just pure hatred, right? Can really point younger folks to be like, oh, like maybe there is still, you know, certain fights to be had, especially in regards to how America, you know, has its relationship with the police.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And that's the thing too, you know, that I think our generation, I feel old, but like our generation specifically, you know, we grew up watching gay marriage be legalized, but I don't think anybody at the age of 15 was like, okay, I'm gonna go get married now. Like, you know what I mean? And so while it was a huge like victory and there was so much momentum for folks who have been doing this movement work for decades and decades, for a lot of younger people, it was like, okay, you know, not to downplay it, but that's the reality of it. You know, we were teenagers when this happened, or we were in middle school. And for us, you know, we looked around and okay, we could get married under the law, but we could still be fired from a job. We could still be denied a wedding cake. We could be denied an apartment with our spouse if we are perceived as queer or trans. And those things impact us right now. Whereas marriage might never impact you if that is your choice, or it'll impact you 20, 30 years from now. And, you know, I just think it's one of those things similar to, you know, outdated HIV laws where we just need to, you know, get ourselves in this work and in this movement. And, you know, if we don't like what the people in power are doing, we have to take their jobs. You know, we run for office, whatever the case is, but you know, it's so difficult, you know, in that sense to feel progress when you are not valued as equal to everybody else. And so yeah, it's interesting to see how the movement has changed over the last couple of decades for sure.
And I think it's also important for us to remember, you know, like the case that did win us equality was about a man who had a partner that was HIV positive and was in the process of dying, and he couldn't get to see his partner in the hospital as passed away. And I think that's something that we all need to like remember when we think about marriage equality, because like that is our roots in this, and like that is the fight that we still have to be, you know, battling out. And I don't know, it always makes me like tear up. Like that's why we have equality, is so that we can be with each other when we die. Like it's not
Right.
it's not necessarily a thing that was passed because the, you know, Supreme Court was like, maybe we don't hate gay people anymore. It was like, no, gay people are begging to like die with dignity and with their loved ones.
Yeah. And you know, well, we're still winning the battle to die with dignity, right? But we still need to win the battle of living with dignity, you know, because, you know, as we all know here, just having those bare minimum protections, and, you know, succeeding in that, whatever that looks like, right? It could be at the federal level with the Equality Act. If things change in the Ohio legislature, maybe we see that in Ohio in a couple of years, but nobody should have to wait that long, you know? So really, you know, kind of like you said, Bucky, elections do matter. Even if we, you know, wish that they didn't, even if, you know, they don't fix everything, they absolutely don't, no matter who's in office, right? We're not going to get everything that we want overnight, and we're definitely not going to get them from politicians. We're going to get them through movement work, grassroots organizing, protesting, what have you. But, you know, things like Title X funding, things like protecting abortion access, the Equality Act, whatever else we might see under the Biden administration, those bare minimums save people's lives. And Title X funding, especially because, you know, federal dollars can't pay for abortion. They don't pay for abortion. I wish my tax dollars did, frankly, but they do not. And so, you know, when we talk about Title X funding, it's not funding abortion. It's funding HIV tests. It's funding HIV treatment, counseling, STD tests, all of those different things, pap smears, birth control, you name it, for people who wouldn't have the healthcare otherwise. And when it comes down to Planned Parenthood specifically, we are one of the sole providers of that healthcare in a lot of underserved communities. We are the only health center, perhaps in close distance for some people. Maybe they don't have cars, you know, whatever the case is. And so when we talk about this funding, you know, it does tie back to HIV criminalization in that way. It's all connected, you know. And yeah, it's just getting these little wins, as tiny as they might feel, continue to change the movement, changes the game. So yeah, I think we're on the right track, but we have a ways to go, obviously.
I think it also like speaks to how important it is for like queer people to still be like involved in the political process. Like I know I have a couple of friends who are like after marriage equality happened, they're like, well, I don't really like see myself as like being in the community because it doesn't like affect me on a like visible day-to-day basis. And I'm like,
Right.
a lot of people who like are in a more vulnerable position and they are affected on a day-to-day basis, and that's what we have to keep fighting for.
Right. Absolutely. And I think, you know, it also comes down to just respecting the people that fought before you. So yeah, there are a lot of, you know, LGBTQ people who do feel that way, indifference, if you will. And the only reason that they can feel that indifference is because of people who fought and died before them, right? Just being able to exist in this space and talk about being LGBTQ, that's huge. It doesn't feel like it, right? Like it feels normal, but it is absolutely a big deal. And you know, it's okay if there are people who don't want to be super politically involved, of course, but at the end of the day, you know, we have to keep changing that narrative so the generations that come after us don't have to fight for this stuff anymore, you know? And who knows where we'll be in 10 to 20 years from now, but, you know, I think folks like us and folks doing this work, we're on the right track. So, optimism.
I love the optimism, and I think you know the idea of, oh, I don't need to be politically active, so therefore I won't. If people have that mentality, I would urge them to think, why are you so protected from these things? Maybe do you have different privileges that are protecting you from the brute force of oppression? And do you know other people? Do you like know other people in your community that don't have those privileges? And I'd really challenge folks to be like, why do you think you don't need to be involved? So I think we all have a very big part to play in all of this, and not just on LGBT issues. Like, our liberation is completely dependent on our other communities around us that are also oppressed. So I strongly encourage folks to take like an intersectional approach to your activism. Think about how our liberation is just as tied to Black liberation as it's tied to Indigenous liberation and things like this. And that it's not just LGBT issues that we should be focusing on, because as minorities, when we get together, we are the majority, as cheesy as that sounds, but we do have so much untapped power. And our oppressors, they want us to have infighting between us because they're afraid of how great we would be together and how much we would get done. So anyways, this is my soapbox. But
I agree with you.
I really do challenge folks, and I have friends that I love very dearly that are just like, well, I just don't see why I need to be a part of this. And I'm like, well, I'm glad you feel that safe.
Right.
But for some people, we don't feel that safe. And maybe we feel safer in some spaces than others. And we have some legal protections, but are those legal protections going to 100% prevent things like microaggressions from happening in the workplace? Like, that's something I've definitely experienced working at OSU, is that they can say a lot of small things, but until they say anything against you specifically, it's not a problem.
Absolutely. And even with legal equality, how many LGBTQ folks do you know that can afford a lawyer to take somebody to court? And it really does come down to that legal and lived equality, because yes, we absolutely need things like the Equality Act, but also like, we need to just be able to exist regardless of where we are for, whatever reason. But I think you make a really good point for folks who don't feel the desire or the need to get involved. Like, I implore you to ask yourself why. Because it comes down to that privilege. And you talked about intersectionality. It is connected, because there are LGBTQ people who are people of color, who are indigenous, who are immigrants, who need abortions, who need birth control. Like, LGBTQ people are not a monolith, right? We all know that. And all of our identities, whether we're queer, trans, or what have you, we still have other identities attached to that. And so, I think folks do need to think about the fact that together, putting all of our power together in this movement will get us where we want to be, but it won't happen unless we actually do that. So I think, you're really on the mark with that. So.
Thanks. Sorry, we just had a run and it started pouring rain.
No, it absolutely is. I don't know what's happening.
No, I was like, protect the laptop, it's recording.
Right.
But does anyone else have any other questions or anything you'd like to voice with Mason here?
And I can drop my info in the chat if there are folks who do have questions, or if there are folks who want to be more involved with Planned Parenthood. Or, anything in general, right? Planned Parenthood is not just, abortion access. We're not just, reproductive rights. We are those things, absolutely. But we are also LGBTQ rights, immigrant rights, defund the police, sex work rights, you name it. And we are just continuing to expand on that, but we can't do that unless we have more people bringing different perspectives into this work. So yeah.
Oh, thank you. So, there's one chat I want to see. Oh, that's just you saying your socials. But thank you so much for spending your time with us today. I so greatly appreciate it. I think we have a lot of work to do ahead of us, but you've definitely laid the path for, we have some actionable items to do this evening once we're done here. I think we're going to take about a 10-minute break, and then we will go into Greg Cody's.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Mason.
Always.